BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And today we're also going through the Unabomber Manifesto. And as you'll see here, this is listed as part 2, and I'll hopefully post a link to part 1 in the description box. But if you haven't heard that one already, you can keep listening, because we're just talking about the Unabomber Manifesto and some of the content in there. On this channel, we don't really do traditional book reviews. We're just having kind of a conversation about some of the ideas that were expressed by Ted Kaczynski in the Unabomber Manifesto. Well, I can say I've been making some good progress on it, and I'm a very slow reader. And in part 1, I was reading from the text that the Washington Post had put online for free, but to speed things up, I was using the audiobook that had been uploaded to YouTube. Multiple channels have uploaded copies of the audiobook, the audio version of the Unabomber Manifesto. What can we really say about it? Well, one of the points that is brought up by Ted Kaczynski in this manifesto is the concept of how the advancements in technology that we experience in our society leads to a middle class that just becomes complacent, that becomes useless, or that the people in the middle class become frustrated because it's like that expression that people say, you get a bunch of middle class philosophers with nothing to do, where they mean like people are going to college, they're graduating, they feel like they can recognize problems in the world, but they feel that they're just absolutely powerless when it comes to facing them. And that sentiment is very much involved with some of the middle parts of this manifesto here. So, I mean, the reason we got onto the subject was I mentioned that I heard something from the comedian and podcast host Sam Tripoli when he said that a lot of what the Unabomber was saying in the manifesto was true. And I wanted to read the thing in its entirety for myself to see where things would go. And what I can say about it is, it really depends on what your definition of truth is, because it's really just making a lot of cynical statements and making a lot of kind of pessimistic observations about society, talking about, yeah, people are getting cheated, yeah, people are getting ripped off. And, I mean, definitely, we do experience a lot of those things. People do end up in middle-class situations where they feel that the political system is not on their side, they feel the government is not on their side. And it's not only middle class. I mean, people amongst all classes can see that the government is not always on their side, or that the politicians are not always looking out for their best interests. Or how about this, just that the entire political system is corrupt, that politicians only care about power, self-serving, power-hungry individuals they are. We can see these problems, but it's like, well, what do we do about it? And, I mean, Ted Kaczynski is recognizing just that, he's really combating the rise of an industry, even just saying that the factory is a bad thing, more or less. I mean, that sentence is somewhat paraphrased, but that idea is definitely carried on in the parts of the book that I was just going through, parts of the manifesto, rather, that the factory has led to a lot of trouble. And after the Industrial Revolution, people were expecting that there was just going to be this massive decrease in poverty, that there would be so much less poverty after the Industrial Revolution. And what we can say, though, is, I mean, if you listen to some people, that we actually are entering into a world that is going to have less poverty in it. The problem is, though, the changes are happening so gradually that we aren't really aware of it 100%. We aren't really able to observe it in its entirety, and it's happening slowly and gradually since the Industrial Revolution. But what I can say about that is, back when we were talking about the Humanity Party and Marvelous Work and a Wonder and the Real Illuminati, they all made claims. And that's just the same organization, just with different names. So we say they made claims that people have tried to eliminate poverty many times over the course of human history, and it hasn't always been successful. For example, the New Testament is actually a plan to eliminate poverty. It's like they looked at the Old Testament and they're like, look at all this stuff about, the killing and destruction. Well, let's talk about, there's no place for a rich man in heaven, and feed the hungry and clothe the naked and help the sick. All of those things. I mean, like, they're just like, that was a plan to eliminate poverty. People have tried. It's just really difficult. Granted, that's a very, very kind of theoretical statement, controversial statement, argumentative statement. That's just their take on the subject. And they even say that Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon was actually a plan to eliminate poverty and call for universal brotherhood. It's just he went about it in a way in which he thought that he could convince the masses. I mean, he definitely didn't convince the creators of South Park. I would say that much if you're going to talk about the Book of Mormon. But the thing is, though, I mean, the point is reducing poverty, eliminating poverty, bringing it down to zero is not as easy as it would seem. And even though we do have many mass shootings going on, we've talked about Steven Pinker and the better angels of our nature on this channel before, and what we can say about that is that, okay, we have mass shootings, we still have wars, we still have conflicts in the world, but overall there is a reduction in violent deaths that has been happening since the Industrial Revolution. But Ted Kaczynski really calls it out and just says that it's kind of like the human progress toward industry is just a bane of like the existence of humanity, that really is the destructive thing. And I'm not completely convinced by a lot of this. I mean, I was tending to lean a little bit more towards Sam Tripoli's statement in part one, because, he's talking so much just about making a lot of criticisms of society and just saying, yeah, okay, society is unfair. But when he really wants to identify how industrial progress and technology are destroying society, um, there is a certain case for that. I mean, you can make a kind of a, I mean, you really can take that standpoint. It's a defendable standpoint. And when you look at it that way, it's just like, I mean, I don't know why some people have such a hard time grasping the idea that people are going to get mad when you cut down a forest to build a parking lot, or you cut down in two forests to build an industrial complex. Like, I don't know why people have such a hard time grasping why some people are very frustrated and outraged by that type of behavior. And I mean, that's one side of it, because there is a certain argumentative standpoint that you can take defending conservation and protection of nature and the value of nature and the rise of industrial powers and the rise of technological powers often bring a lot of destruction upon the earth and thus in turn destruction upon humanity. That's all real. I mean, we're all aware of that. I mean, like, it's just like we're just all, many people are into finding the balance, but there is a standpoint that comes to us from a different group that would really be very critical of somebody like Ted Kaczynski. From things like the United Front Against Austerity, they're just like, you have to be pro-growth. You have to encourage people to strive toward technology, strive toward advancement, strive toward the things that are allowing people to innovate and to create. Those things should never be limited. And the reason why they're saying that is, if you take that ability away, then you're just going to have a massive amount of people that are pretty much going to be just they're pretty much going to be ending their own lives. And Ted Kaczynski talks about this in the manifesto. Like, he's like, yeah, okay, people will be more subject to disease if they're living in nature, but they'll do it stoically. I mean, I think that's almost a direct quote from the manifesto. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, you're going to have more problems. You're going to have a lot of trouble if you're living amongst nature, but amongst the natural entities, but you would be free, but you would have a greater sense of freedom, and you'd also have less of a destructive output into the world. You'd be projecting less destruction out, as well as some things such as you wouldn't be someone who is just becoming another pawn on the chessboard for the global elites. And I think that's one of the points that he was really trying to emphasize in his own way, is that he didn't want people to become just another coin in someone else's pocket, just a person who has their humanity taken over by a system, and he wanted to call out the system. But I said, though, if he was ever going to go on to do criminal activities and destructive activities to try and justify his manifesto and his way of thinking, everything he did is ruined because, well, I mean, what's the point of listening to him as a genuine political philosopher if he's actually going to be committing destructive actions? This whole notion of, well, let's do something illegal and then use the press coverage surrounding our illegal activities to get people to read our ideas and to listen to what we have to say, it's utterly useless. Everyone's just going to look at you as like some type of kook and some type of wacky individual. And that's why we're talking about Ted Kaczynski, is because he was a kook and he was wacky. I mean, that's why. That's what attracts me to stuff, and I have no shame in saying that at all. And also, I mentioned that we're hopefully going to do something in the future where we compare Ted Kaczynski to Anders Behring Breivik from Norway. But earlier today when we did our kind of daily quote, I mean, the one that came out yesterday, actually, it depends on the time, the clock, and all that. Okay, yesterday, we did the the quote from Andrew Yang talking about humanity first. And the presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, talks so much about the rise of automation. He's humanity first, the war on normal people. But, like, by coincidence, a lot of that stuff is mentioned in the Unabomber Manifesto. And I only say by coincidence because I was talking about Andrew Yang earlier, and I didn't know I was going to get to any of these sections in the Unabomber Manifesto. But you see, though, it's like they are talking about this. I mean, he was talking all about the rise of automation and then how it's going to displace many people and how it's just not going to benefit society. It's actually going to bring about a lot of destruction upon society because people are going to lose their jobs. They're going to be given, if they are given some form of employment, it's just going to be busy work that is going to drive people crazy. People are just going to be treated once again like something that can be compartmentalized. They're going to diminish the value of humanity. But one of the other reasons to be pro-growth is that the United Front Against Austerity talks about is that it's not so much about, like automation is going to displace people. It's more about how innovations in automation can create more jobs than they take away. It's just going to take some time. And the reason is, it's like growth leads to the interconnection of society. Growth leads to the interconnection of humanity. And in the earlier parts of the manifesto, Ted Kaczynski talks about that. He talks about how conservatives they might want to conserve values, but conservatives are all about progress and change when it comes to technological innovation. No matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on, most people are for technology and innovation. Technology and innovation lead to the interconnection of humanity. They lead to people working together, different people from different backgrounds trying to come together and achieve a solution. And that is one of the foundational principles of civilization. And Charlie Chaplin even talks about this in his speech from The Great Dictator. The airplane and the radio, by their very nature, have brought us closer together. They call out for universal brotherhood. And that's not just, fancy talk. That is also, I mean, when you say it's a foundational principle of civilization, it's like people coming together for cooperative actions is one of the things that drives a civilization forward. And once again, there are a bunch of defendable claims that you can make. For years, people thought it was warfare that brought civilization together. Like, if we put your tribe and my tribe together, then we have twice as many people to fight off invaders and fight off predators. But then, some archaeologists really found some contrary evidence to that standpoint, and they're like, if we take your tribe and my tribe and put them together, we have twice as many items to trade. Cooperative action was what was driving civilization forward. And, there's probably going to be some variants of that are going to be going on all over the world because we don't necessarily know how old civilization is. But the way to keep civilization moving in a forward, successful direction is to be pro-growth and to be pro-trade, pro-commerce, pro-industry. And that's like why they're taking that standpoint. And it's not like that. And I got to be very clear. I do not subscribe to that standpoint. These are just some of the challenges that people would make to somebody like Ted Kaczynski's manifesto that talks all about how the progress and innovations in technology are being a destructive force to humanity. That is a very large sentiment that is carried out through many different sections and many different of his numbered paragraphs in the manifesto. The other thing that we can say about this is a challenge to somebody like Ted Kaczynski would simply be Milton Friedman, who is on the complete opposite end of the political spectrum for the United Front Against Austerity and the Humanity Party. Milton Friedman would be in a completely different direction. And what he would just simply say is, if you want to make change in the world, if you want to do something good for the world, get yourself a job, buy a house, and buy a nice suit. That's how you kind of do good things in the world. He was all about not meddling with the political system. Anytime you try to do the right thing in terms of politics and economics, it creates a front for special interest. That's, once again, practically a direct quote from Milton Friedman. So he's more just like, there really isn't so much to feel bad about, or you shouldn't feel bad about any of the reasons why Ted Kaczynski is talking about, because what you should do is strive for your own personal ambition without being destructive, and that's really the answer to things. And it's just like, you have to use your own intelligence and your own abilities to climb in the world and to climb the ladders that life has played out in front of you, and it's putting responsibility onto the individual, more or less. We're just talking about some different perspectives. I just think it was really interesting that Ted Kaczynski wanted to mention a lot of things about automation when we've talked so much about the rise of automation and possibilities of having universal basic income in our current day and age, mostly thanks to Andrew Yang. He's really brought it to the mainstream as of now, January 2020. But aside from Andrew Yang, I mean, universal basic income and the rise of automation have been talked about by countless people on all aspects of the political spectrum. We had John Linder and Neil Bortz all through the book about the fair tax. And we also had, like, even, like just the Libertarian Party in general has talked about a form of universal basic income for ages. John Linder was the Republican congressman formerly of the 4th District of Georgia. So you have Republicans, Libertarians, Democrats. They've all talked about universal basic income in their own way, but that's getting a little bit away from Ted Kaczynski. What I can really see is that Ted Kaczynski was somebody who really seemed to think that industrial progress was something that was very destructive to humanity. And one of the reasons we haven't mentioned yet is tying it into something about how humans are just, it forces people to be drawn toward things like external beauty, preserving the image of youth, superficiality, because of these things in the age of consumerism and commercialism. And in that point, I would be like, okay, yeah, all right, I got you there. I follow you 100%. And I do. I mean, like, commercialism, getting people to care about external beauty, and just like the superficiality of life. That's what we should really say. Commercialism gets people to care about the superficiality of life. Absolutely, and that would be one point where I don't even think I would play any kind of devil's advocate card like we have been to this point, because it's. I mean, when you think about that, yes. I mean, you watch a commercial, they want to make you buy the product, and this gets into a whole bunch of other things like Edward Bernays and public relations and getting people to be subject to propaganda, and then they can use technology and innovation to get people, practically brainwash them into buying certain products. Or, I mean, maybe they're going to be brainwashing people to give up their handguns or something like that. If you want to ask somebody like Eric Holder, you can find that video online, but he was targeting a very specific demographic. I probably shouldn't even mention that one because that's going to blow up into some, other directions that we could take this discussion. But to keep things more focused on Ted Kaczynski, you can really see that industrial advancement is something that can lead to some very chaotic outcomes. But it's also up to the human beings to navigate the course of life and to try and stay away from this type of destruction that he was talking about. It's easier said than done, but we always need to be aware that we are seeing a reduction in violent deaths. We are seeing these reductions in poverty. And Jordan Peterson famously talks about how from, what was it, the year 2011 to 2015 or something, they saw the largest rise from people out of poverty and into the middle class in the history of human existence, according to the United Nations. And Peterson was one of the consultants for that project. But one last thing we just got to say about people who are being very critical of the ideas that are expressed in this, because it's not only Ted Kaczynski that talks about these types of ideas. You see all these like people who are just like making a lot of progressive predictions, and the futurists out there, they're talking about how this is what's going to happen in the future. This is what's going to happen to the world. But in reality, a lot of that is guesswork. We do not necessarily know 100%. People can give very, very well articulated reasons about why they think that this is what's going to happen next year, and it might not happen at all. I mean, there's a lot of guesswork that comes to predictions and these ideas that people are putting out. But so I'm very skeptical of anyone who tells me, all right, we're going to put in this healthcare plan that's never been tried before, and this is going to be the outcome. We're going to put in the universal basic income, and this is going to be the outcome. We're going to change some things in industrial technology, and this is going to be the outcome. It could be something totally different than what people are predicting. Well, that's just kind of a little bit of a discussion about the Unabomber Manifesto, as well as, well, everything else. I'm only about 2/3 through, so we'll probably do one final upload or something like that. But the first part, as we say, was talking a lot about the political differences and the corrupt political system. And the second part that we've done on this channel has been more about talking about technological innovations and how that can be negative towards society. And then also about things like the effects of the rise of automation, as well as people who are just kind of feeling displaced and disconnected from society in the middle class. That's kind of one of the results that leads to frustration and nihilistic cynicism as well. What do you have to say? I mean, this was kind of all over the map, so I'm sure you must have something to say. If you have anything to say at all, please drop a comment below. And until next time.